Whittington is 211 East Nancy. Today is May 1, 1974. How did your family come to Oklahoma?
Well, my father lived in Chillicothe, Missouri, and they came to Oklahoma in a covered wagon when he was 12 years old. And his two uncles and their families come with him. And he had a sister and a brother and his mother and dad. And his father, when they got here, he bought a farm from the man that had homesteaded the land out at Camp Russell. That's a mile east and 7 miles north of Descriptive.
What was your family's occupation?
They were farmers, and my father went to a business school and took a course in buying cotton at the cotton gin. And he farmed through the summer and spring months, and in the fall he went and bought cotton until around the first of the year. And mother and we children stayed out on the farm, and we did all the work. We raised cotton and corn, and we had a lot of cows and horses, and we all, the children did the work, and with mother supervising us, and Daddy would come home on the weekends and help with the farming. In the spring, in the early summer, when we had to hold the cotton and hold the weeds out of it, we used the cotton was raised in a sand field, and sometimes our feet would get real hot, as we always went barefooted, and they'd get so hot we'd run and get under the shade tree, and sometimes when Father was home on the weekends we had to work, and many a time we all got a spanking for running getting under the shade tree, because sometimes we thought it was a lot hotter than it was. We wanted an excuse to get in the shade a little while. And then we would pick the cotton in the fall and gather the corn. And sometimes we'd get in fight with the corn and throw it at each other, and then we'd have to go and pick it up. But we always tried to do these things when our father wasn't around.
When you lived on the farm, what did you do for amusement?
Well, there were a lot of things that we did on the weekends. Usually on Sunday, of course we always went to church and Sunday school in the morning, and then in the afternoon we'd have a ball game, and I'd usually have to dress up my three little sisters and take them along. And my brothers always played on the ball team, and Father always went, and he was the catcher. And then on Saturday night, someone in the neighborhood would have a party, and sometimes, and we'd play all kinds of party games, and then sometimes some of the families would have a dance. And our father never allowed us to go to dances, so we had this one brother that always answered for us, and Daddy'd ask us if it was going to be a dance or a party, and he'd say, well, they announced it as a party. And we would go and square dance, and sometimes some of the fellas would get drunk on this moonshine, and things would get a little rough, and so we'd always go home when they started that. And we had a lot of fun that way. And then on Halloween, we always had a big time. We'd go play tricks on our folks, and sometimes we'd put the buggy on the top of the barn and push the outbuildings over, and then I recall one time this old lady, she liked to tease us, and so we had put her buggy on top of her barn, and she started shooting at us. And we all fell flat on the ground and rolled down the hill, and sometimes we'd get cut and scratched up. But every Halloween we'd go out and do these things, and our folks always expected to get up in the morning and find things tore up a little bit. And then sometimes when anyone would get married, we'd have a chevy. We'd go and we'd take tin cans and cowbells and put rocks in the tin cans and make a lot of noise. And then if they didn't come out and give us candy or cigar, we'd throw them in the tank. And I never will forget, we went to this one couple to Chevereum, and they were real poor. Of course, we all were at that time, and that was during the 30s. And so they didn't have any cigars or candy, so they told us we could come in and fry potatoes. So we went in and peeled potatoes and fried a big skillet of potatoes and eat them. And that's the types of things that we would do for amusement.
Did you know of any bootleggers?
Well, we had 2 or 3 families in our neighborhood that we thought sold the moonshine, but of course we never could pin it on them, and they never did get caught. But when they would have a dance at their house, well, it come from somewhere, and we always felt that probably that's why they had the dance, so they could sell the moonshine. And but as far as knowing that as a fact, we didn't.
Where did you go to school?
Well, I went to the Camp Russell School, District 54, and it was from the 1st through the 8th grade. And we had lots of experience during our school days. It was a one-room schoolhouse, and we had one teacher, and sometimes we had as many as 60 children, and they were from the 1st to the 8th grade. And we'd have to go to the front of the room and sit on a bench when when the teacher called for us to come forward. And I never will forget my older brother. He was so ornery, and there was a girl there that she was high-tempered and real fighty, and so when they would go forward, their class would, while my brother sat on one side of her and my cousin on the other, and they would tease her, and she would start bawling and start hitting them, and then the whole school would laugh. And of course it was very hard just having the one teacher for all those grades. And I never will forget this one family. They had these 3 grown boys, and they never finished their education, and they would go by the schoolhouse in this old Model T, and they would shoot at the schoolhouse with their shotguns, and the teacher would make us get under the desk, and we were just scared to death of them. And we always felt like that they made moonshine, and that when they do these things that they was probably drunk on us. And I never will forget, one time we were going down the road, and they come by in the car and shot. And I was walking with this boy, and I thought a lot of him. But we had to go through this barbed wire fence, we did, to go down to try to get in this creek where the trees and everything was, so they hide from them. And so we started through the fence, and he went on through, and I got caught in the fence and couldn't get out, and the bullets were going all around me, and I never thought anything of him after that, because I thought he was a coward because he ran off and left me.
A wise choice.
And sometimes our teachers weren't much older than we were, and I never will forget, we had this one teacher, and she'd tell us that we could be off for the day, and we'd go down on the creek and catch frogs and fry the frog legs in butter off of our bread. And that's the way we'd spend the day. And so she didn't teach but the 1 year, and she got fired. But she wasn't much older than the most of the pupils that she taught. And at Christmas time, we always had a program and a big Christmas tree, and there wasn't many of us that ever got anything off of the tree but a sack of candy. They always had a sack of treats for us. But back in those days, why, we really thought it was something if we just got a sack of candy. And we always had a huge tree, and Santa Claus always came. And then we would put on a program, and then at the end of school, why, the parents would usually come, and we'd have a covered dish dinner at noon, and then we'd have a ball game, and all these things is the way we had our fun during those times.
During World War II, you were one of the first women to work at an aircraft factory here in Oklahoma. Did you consider yourself part of the women's lib movement?
Well, we didn't know what the women's lib movement was at that time, but we were really felt the way the women's lib do, because we felt like when we were working there that we had the hardest jobs and the men got the easiest jobs. And the men always made a higher salary than us women did. And we had to do the women did most of the heavier work. And the men usually had the lead jobs. They were the lead men. That was the boss of the department. And so we, at the time of the end of World War II, why, we were organizing a union, and most of them that was working toward organizing this union were the women, because they felt that they weren't getting a fair deal. So I would say that we did more or less have a women's lib.
Can you remember some of the older types of transportation?
As a child, I can remember when we used to go in the wagon, the lumber wagon, and Mother would warm bricks and wrap them in blankets, and then put us near the bricks and put blankets over us, and we would come into Guthrie and to do our shopping, and so at that time, well, of course, it was all dirt roads, and a lot of times it was real muddy, and it would take all day to come into town and do our shopping and go back home, and then I can recall a lot of times when I was a little older, my brothers and I would take a load of corn over to Pleasant Valley to the mill to have it ground for our meal that we made cornbread out of. And I know, and a lot of times it would be so cold that we'd have to get out and walk along beside the wagon to warm up. We would just get cold and stiff that we just have to get off and walk to keep from getting our feet frozen and our hands, and move them a lot. And I always loved to go on those trips, though, because I can remember we always would stop at the little store there, and we'd always get some bologna and cheese and crackers, and that was a real treat to us kids. And we would go, Mother and Dad, a lot of times. The family clan would get together, and we'd have a big dinner. That was mostly always at the holidays, and of course us children always loved to go to those. And I can remember Mother and Dad wrapping us in real good in blankets and taking us, and we'd spend the day. And a lot of times we'd have a big blizzard, and Daddy would, some of them would get the flu, and I can remember Daddy getting on an old horse, and he'd take a gallon bucket full of food for them to eat and do their chores for them. And that was our means of travel. And then when the Model T come in, why, I can remember the first Model T we got, And Daddy he wore a size 13 shoe, and his brother was going to teach him how to drive. And so they went up in the schoolyard, and of course it sat on a hillside, and they started down the hill. And Dad tried to put his feet on the brake, and he got his foot caught in the brake some way, and they went right off over the bank and turned the old Model T over, but it didn't hurt either one of them. And so Dad finally learned to drive the Model T, and then he taught my older brother and sister how to drive. And it was quite a treat. And sometimes my brother and I, when we got older, we'd ask Dad if we could take the Model T, and we'd drive around so much, we'd drive the gas out, and we'd be nearly broke, so we'd just put some of the coal in the car and burn it. And I never will forget one time we come in home, and it was smoking so bad, Dad come out with a bucket of water. He thought it was on fire, and we was afraid to tell him that we'd put the coal oil in it. And then from then, we went to the Model A, and if we get stuck, see, at that time, we didn't have any gravel or paved roads, but if we get stuck or slide off in the ditch, they were light enough, and there were enough of us that we'd get out and lift it out of the ditch and go on.
What do you feel is the main difference between this? What do you feel is the main difference between the society of then and today?
Well, back in those days, when we lived out on the farm, it was a community of farmers, and we were all more or less on equal basis financially, and we were just kind of like a big happy family, because in those days we didn't have the modern equipment that they have today, and in our farming, and we had to depend on each other during the wheat harvest. All the neighbor men would go from farm to farm and harvest the crop, and the same in gathering the cotton and the corn. Everybody more or less helped each other, because we didn't have all of these modern things, and all this work had to be done by hand, and so that way it drew us all closer together. And we didn't have I can remember when we didn't even have a radio. And my brother-in-law brought out one of these little radios with earphones. And we kids used to fight over who's going to wear the earphones and hear the music on the radio. And all we had in the type of music was these old phonographs that you crank up by hand. And we used to crank them up and dance and do those type of things. And I don't know, it just seems at that time that families were a lot closer than they are today. They didn't have the means of transportation to go away, to get out of their community like they have today. And although we didn't have much, I think in a way we had happier times, and we're closer than people are today that has these modern ways of getting around, and the TV, and all these modern things.
Then do you prefer the society of then to that of today?
Well, no, I think I'll take today, because even though we had lots of happy times, we had a lot of hardship. And I don't think I would like to go back to the old way of life.
This is Lucia Perri finishing her interview with Helen Whittington, May 1st, 1974.